Here is a frequency that travels between stars, older than any empire, more sacred than any treaty. It is called the Beacon of Last Resort, a signal that has been transmitted only 7 times in the recorded history of the galaxy. When a civilization faces extinction, when all hope has been exhausted and death comes on wings too vast to comprehend, they may light the beacon. It is a cry into the void, a plea to any power that might hear, a final, desperate prayer that someone, somewhere, will answer. In 11,000 years, every beacon had been answered. Fleets had gathered from across the galactic arm. Ancient rivals had set aside their hatreds. Powers that had not spoken in millennia had emerged from their isolation to stand against the darkness. The beacon was sacred because it had never been ignored, because when one civilization screamed into the void had always screamed back with the thunder of 1,000 warships. Until us. Until the Varanthi sovereignty lit the 8th beacon, and no fleet answered. I am Counselor Mirren Voss, first voice of the Varanthi High Council, and I have spent the last 14 months watching my civilization die. Not in the dramatic conflagration of a single great battle, but in the slow, grinding annihilation of a war we cannot win against an enemy we cannot understand. The Hollow, we have no better name for them, came from the spaces between galaxies, from the vast dark where no star has ever burned. They do not negotiate, they do not pause. They simply advance, and everything they touch becomes nothing. We fought them with fleets that had conquered 1,000 worlds. We deployed weapons that could reshape the surfaces of planets. We threw everything we had built across 8,000 years of civilization at the advancing darkness. It was not enough. It was never enough. When the beacon was lit, I stood in the chamber of stars and watched the signal race outward at speeds that mocked the laws of physics. The ancient protocols guaranteed that every major power in the galaxy would receive it within hours. The Thessari Dominion, the Synthesis Collective, the Tribunal of Endless Light, the Mercantile Confederation, even the isolationist powers who had not engaged with galactic affairs in centuries. The signal would reach them all. And they would come. They had always come. That was the covenant, the unwritten law that bound all civilized species together. When extinction loomed, no one stood alone. For 3 days we waited. The Hollow continued their advance. 2 more colony worlds fell silent. The defensive fleet at Varanthi Prime, our home world, the heart of everything we were, prepared for a last stand that our own calculations said we could not survive. And no one came. The responses trickled in like a slow poison. The Thessari Dominion expressed profound regret but could not spare forces from their own border conflicts. The Synthesis Collective was undergoing internal restructuring and was unable to commit resources to external engagements. The Tribunal of Endless Light sent prayers and blessings, but explained that their pacifist doctrine prevented military intervention. One by one, every power we had counted as allies, every civilization we had traded with and treated with and trusted for millennia found reasons to decline. The covenant that had held for 11,000 years crumbled in 3 days, and we were left alone with the darkness. I remember standing in the Chamber of Stars after the last refusal came in, surrounded by counselors who had served the sovereignty for centuries, watching their faces as they understood what the silence meant. We were going to die. Not just some of us, all of us. 8,000 years of history, billions of lives, the accumulated wisdom and art and achievement of a civilization that had touched the stars before most species had learned to walk upright. All of it would end, and no one was coming to help. It was Counselor Thren who mentioned the humans. I almost dismissed the suggestion immediately. Humanity was a minor species, barely 3 centuries removed from their first faster-than-light flight. They controlled perhaps 24 worlds in an unremarkable sector of the outer spiral. Their technology was derivative, their military capacity negligible, their political influence non-existent. We had noted their existence in our archives and promptly forgotten about them. They did not refuse, Thren said quietly. Every other power sent a response. The humans sent nothing. Because they are irrelevant, I replied. They probably lack the capacity to even receive the beacon signal. Or they are already responding and saw no need to announce it.
I stared at him. You cannot be serious. What could humans possibly offer against the Hollow? Their entire fleet would not survive a single engagement.
Their entire known fleet, Thren corrected. We know very little about humanity, Counselor. They have always been opaque. Because there is nothing to know. They are a young species with limited resources and no strategic significance. Perhaps Thren's ancient eyes held something I could not identify. Or perhaps we have made assumptions that are not supported by evidence. The humans have never fought a war against a major power. They have never been tested. We do not actually know what they are capable of, only what they have chosen to show us. I wanted to argue further, but the truth was that we had nothing left to lose. The Hollow would reach Varanthi Prime in less than a week. Our fleet was shattered. Our allies had abandoned us. If there was even the slightest chance that humanity could offer something, anything, we had to pursue it. I took a diplomatic vessel and traveled to human space myself. It was not a journey I expected to survive, but survival had stopped being my primary concern. I went because someone had to, because the alternative was sitting in the chamber of stars and waiting for the darkness to swallow us all. Human space was not what I expected.
The border stations were small, functional, almost deliberately unimpressive. No grand monuments to human achievement, no displays of power or prestige, just clean lines and efficient design, staffed by personnel who moved with a quiet competence that I found oddly unsettling.
I was met at Station Rimward 7 by a human woman named Commander Sarah Chen. She was middle-aged by human standards, with gray streaking her dark hair and lines around her eyes that spoke of experience rather than age. Her uniform was practical, unadorned, and she carried herself with the easy confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. "Counselor Voss," she said, extending her hand in the human gesture of greeting. "We've been expecting you." "You received the beacon, then?" "We received it." She did not elaborate. "And you did not respond." "We don't make promises we aren't certain we can keep." She gestured for me to follow her. "Please, come with me. There are people who want to speak with you." I followed her through corridors that were functional rather than grand, past personnel who acknowledged us with nods but no ceremony. Everything about the station felt restrained, contained, like a coiled spring that had not yet been released. "You know why I'm here," I said as we walked. "Yes." "And you know what we face. The Hollow are unlike anything the galaxy has encountered. They have destroyed fleets that should have been invincible. They have consumed worlds that should have been impregnable. Every power that has faced them directly has been annihilated." We know. Then you understand that I am not here to ask for token assistance. I am here because my civilization is dying, and no one else will help us.
Commander Chen stopped walking and turned to face me. Her expression was calm, but I saw something in her eyes that I could not immediately identify, something that looked almost like recognition.
Counselor Voss, may I ask you something?
Of course. In the 8,000 years of Viranthi civilization, how many times has your species faced extinction? The question caught me off guard. I don't understand. It's a simple question. How many times has your species been on the brink of complete annihilation? How many times have you faced a threat so overwhelming that survival seemed impossible? I thought about it, really thought, and I realized that I did not have an answer. Never, I admitted. We have faced wars, conflicts, periods of instability, but extinction, no. The Viranthi have always been powerful enough to ensure our survival. Until now. Until now. Commander Chen nodded slowly. Humanity has faced extinction 6 times since we developed the capacity to record our history. Ice ages that nearly froze us out of existence, plagues that killed more than half our population, wars that came within hours of ending our civilization entirely, environmental collapse that we caused ourselves and barely survived. I did not know this. Most species don't. They see our short history, our limited territory, our unremarkable technology, and they assume we are simply young and undeveloped. They don't realize that we have been fighting for survival since before we learned to speak, that every generation inherits a world that the previous generation nearly destroyed, that we have more experience with extinction than any species in this galaxy. I stared at her, uncertain how to respond. What are you saying? I'm saying that we understand what you're facing, Counselor. We understand it in a way that older, more powerful civilizations cannot. The Kethri and Asynthesis and all the others, they have never truly faced the end. They have never looked into the abyss and seen their own annihilation staring back at them. We have, many times.
And yet you survived.
Yes, we survived. She began walking again, and I followed. Not because we were the strongest or the smartest or the most advanced. We survived because we refused to die. Because when everything else failed, we found something inside ourselves that would not give up, would not surrender, would not accept that the story was over.
We reached a door that looked no different from any other. Commander Chen paused with her hand on the control panel. The people on the other side of this door are going to ask you questions, Counselor. Difficult questions. They're going to want to understand not just what you're facing, but who you are, what you're willing to do, what you're willing to sacrifice. I am willing to sacrifice anything to save my people. Are you? She held my gaze. Anything? I did not answer immediately. The weight of her question pressed down on me, demanding an honesty I was not sure I possessed. Yes, I said finally. Anything. She nodded and opened the door. The room beyond was a command center filled with displays and personnel and the quiet hum of activity. At the center stood a man I recognized from our archives, Admiral James Okonkwo, the commander of humanity's defense forces. He was tall, dark-skinned, with a presence that seemed to fill the room without demanding attention. "Counselor Voss," he said, rising to greet me, "thank you for coming." "Thank you for receiving me. I understand you have questions." "I do. But first, let me show you something." He gestured to a display, and I saw a tactical projection of the galactic arm. Points of light marked the major civilizations, trade routes, defensive positions. and at the edge of the projection, spreading like a stain, was the Hollow's territory, a growing void where stars had once burned.
The Hollow have consumed approximately 47 star systems since their emergence, Admiral Okonkwo said. They have destroyed an estimated 12 billion sentient beings across 7 species. Their rate of expansion is accelerating.
You have been monitoring them.
Since the first reports reached us, yes. And you did nothing.
We prepared. He met my eyes. There is a difference.
Prepared for what?
For this moment. For the moment when the galaxy's refusal to act would make action necessary. He turned back to the display. We knew that the major powers would not respond to the threat until it was too late. The Thessari are too focused on their internal politics. The synthesis values efficiency over survival. The tribunal believes that righteousness will protect them from annihilation.
You knew they would refuse the beacon?
We calculated the probability at over 90%. Civilizations that have never faced extinction cannot comprehend it. They believe that what has always existed will always continue to exist. They cannot imagine the end.
But you can.
We can. We always have. He turned to face me fully. Counselor Voss, I'm going to be direct with you. Humanity has been preparing for a war like this since we first made contact with the galactic community. Not specifically against the Hollow, we had no way of predicting them, but against the possibility that someday something would come that required a response beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen.
Why? Your species has no natural enemies in the galaxy. No civilization has threatened you.
Because we know what we are. Admiral Okonkwo's voice was quiet, but carried absolute conviction. We are a species that has nearly destroyed itself more times than we can count. We have seen what happens when a threat is ignored, when complacency replaces vigilance, when the assumption of safety becomes a substitute for the reality of preparation. We will not make that mistake with the universe. I thought about his words, about Commander Chen's words, about the quiet, functional efficiency of everything I had seen in human space, and I began to understand something that I had not grasped before. Humanity was not unimpressive because they lacked capability. They were unimpressive because they had chosen to appear that way. Every aspect of their public presence, the small stations, the limited fleet, the unremarkable technology, was a deliberate mask. What are you really capable of? I asked.
Admiral Okonkwo smiled slightly. That, Counselor, is what I'm about to show you.
He touched a control, and the display changed. I saw ship production facilities hidden in asteroid belts and gas giant moons. I saw weapons platforms disguised as mining operations. I saw training academies scattered across dozens of worlds, producing soldiers and pilots and commanders at a rate that seemed impossible. I saw a fleet, not the 200 vessels in humanity's public registry, but thousands, tens of thousands, hidden in the deep void between stars. I could not find the words. This is not possible. 3 centuries of preparation, Admiral Okonkwo said. 3 centuries of building while the galaxy dismissed us as irrelevant. 3 centuries of waiting for the moment when we would be needed. Why hide this? With this capability, you could have become a major power. You could have claimed territory, demanded respect, shaped galactic politics, and drawn attention to ourselves before we were ready, made enemies before we had the strength to face them, been seen as a threat before we had proven ourselves as allies. He shook his head. Power that is visible is power that can be targeted. We chose to remain invisible until the moment when visibility served a greater purpose.
And that moment is now?
That moment is now. He gestured to the display again. The Hollow are coming, Counselor. They will reach Varanthi Prime within the week. After that, they will continue their expansion, consuming everything in their path. The Thessari, the Synthesis, every civilization that refused the beacon, believing themselves safe.
You mean to fight them? No, Admiral Okonkwo said. We mean to stop them, permanently.
The hours that followed were a blur of briefings and preparations and conversations that rewrote everything I thought I knew about humanity. I learned about their history, not the sanitized version in galactic archives, but the truth of a species that had clawed its way to the stars through blood and fire and extinction. I learned about their philosophy, the belief that survival was not a right but a responsibility, that every generation owed it to the next to be ready for the worst the universe could offer.
I learned about the ship.
It did not have a formal name. In human records, it was designated only as Vessel Zero, the first and greatest of humanity's hidden fleet, built in secret over more than 2 centuries. It was not a warship in any conventional sense. It was a weapon designed to fight things that could not be fought, to kill things that could not be killed, to stand against threats that had never existed before and might never exist again. "We built it because we didn't know what we would face," Commander Chen explained as she showed me the specifications. "We couldn't predict the Hollow, couldn't model their capabilities or their weaknesses, so we built something that could adapt, something that could learn, something that could face the unknown and find a way to win." "One ship," I said, "against an enemy that has consumed fleets numbering in the thousands."
One ship that carries everything we are, everything we've learned, everything we've survived. She looked at me with those calm, certain eyes. The Hollow have never faced anything like us, Counselor. They've destroyed civilizations that were powerful but predictable, ancient but complacent, vast but brittle.
And humanity is different? Humanity has been broken more times than any species should survive. We've faced the end of everything and found ways to continue. We've adapted to threats that should have destroyed us. We've rebuilt from ashes so many times that we've forgotten how to stay defeated. She smiled, and there was something fierce in it. The Hollow are about to learn what it means to fight a species that doesn't know how to die. I returned to Varanthi Prime with Commander Chen and a human delegation. The journey took 3 days, and with each passing hour, the weight of what was coming pressed down on us. The Hollow's advance had accelerated. 2 more colony worlds had fallen. The last defensive fleet at Varanthi Prime was preparing for an engagement they knew they could not survive. When we arrived, the Council was in chaos. News of the approaching darkness had spread through the population, and fear was becoming panic. Counselor Thren met us at the orbital station, his face gray with exhaustion. "You found nothing," he said when he saw me. "The humans cannot help us." "I've found something," I replied, "but it is not what I expected." I led him to the observation port, and I showed him what had followed us home. Against the backdrop of stars, a single ship hung in the void. It was not large by the standards of Varanthi capital ships, perhaps 3 kilometers along its main axis. Its design was angular, functional, devoid of the aesthetic considerations that most civilizations built into their vessels. Looking at it, you would not think it remarkable. But there was something about the way it moved, something about the way it held position, something about the energy readings that our sensors could not quite interpret. It felt wrong in a way I could not articulate, like looking at a predator pretending to be prey. "One ship," Counselor Thren said. "They sent one ship."
They sent the only ship that matters.
He stared at me. "Counselor Voss, with respect, have you lost your reason? One ship cannot stand against the Hollow. Our entire defensive fleet cannot stand against them. What makes you believe that a single human vessel can accomplish what thousands of our own could not?" "Because they are different," I said. "Because they have been preparing for this moment for 3 centuries. Because they have faced extinction so many times that they have forgotten how to accept it."
Before Thren could respond, the station's alarm systems activated. The Hollow had arrived.
I watched from the observation port as the darkness emerged from fold space at the edge of the system. It was not like watching a fleet arrive. It was like watching reality itself become infected. The stars seemed to dim as the Hollow spread across the void, a stain of absolute negation that swallowed light and matter and meaning. Our defensive fleet moved to engage. Thousands of warships, the pride of Varanthi's civilization, the culmination of 8 millennia of military development. They fired everything they had, weapons that could crack planets, energies that could ignite stars. The void lit up with the fury of a dying civilization. The Hollow did not slow. The darkness absorbed every weapon, consumed every ship, advanced with the terrible patience of entropy itself. I watched the fleet die, one vessel at a time, their signals winking out like candles in a hurricane. And then the human ship moved. It did not charge into battle. It did not fire immediately. It simply positioned itself, slid between our dying fleet and the advancing darkness like a door closing on a furnace. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the ship spoke. I do not know how else to describe it. The vessel emitted something, a signal, a frequency, a communication that registered on every sensor system in the star system simultaneously. It was not words, it was not data, it was something older, something more primal, something that the Hollow understood. A declaration, a challenge, a refusal. The Hollow paused. For the first time since their emergence, they actually stopped advancing. The darkness hung motionless in the void, and I swear I could feel something like surprise emanating from it. Then the ship attacked. I have witnessed battles that spanned star systems. I have seen weapons that could reshape the fabric of reality. I have studied the great conflicts of galactic history, the campaigns that decided the fate of civilizations. Nothing prepared me for what I saw. The human ship did not fire conventional weapons. It projected something into the heart of the Hollow, a lance of energy that was not quite energy, a force that existed in dimensions our sensors could not perceive. Where it struck, the darkness did not dissipate or retreat. It burned. The Hollow screamed. That is not a metaphor. The entity that had consumed 47 star systems, that had erased 12 billion lives with casual indifference, screamed. The sound carried across frequencies that should not have existed, a howl of pain and rage and something that might have been fear. And the human ship pressed forward. It moved through the darkness like a burning brand through fog, its weapons tearing holes in the Hollow that did not close. The entity tried to consume it. I watched tendrils of absolute void wrap around the vessel, attempting to do what they had done to every ship that had ever opposed them. But the human ship would not be consumed. Its hull blazed with energy that the darkness could not touch, and everywhere it went, the hollow died.
The battle lasted 7 hours.
I watched every moment of it. I watched the human ship carve a path through the darkness, watched the hollow throw everything they had at this single vessel that refused to fall. I watched the tide of battle turn, slowly at first, then with increasing certainty, as the entity that had seemed invincible began to retreat. By the 3rd hour, the hollow were no longer advancing. By the 5th, they were in full retreat. By the 7th, the darkness was collapsing in on itself, imploding into a singularity of its own negation as the human ship delivered the final blow. When it was over, the stars burned clear once more. The hollow were gone, not just defeated, but destroyed, erased from existence as thoroughly as they had erased so many others. And at the center of the void where they had been, the human ship hung motionless, battered but unbroken. I found Commander Chen in the station's communication center, coordinating with her vessel. Her face was drawn with exhaustion, but her eyes were calm.
"It's over," I said. "This engagement is over. The hollow may have other concentrations elsewhere in the galaxy. We'll need to hunt them down."
Your ship, the weapons it used, I have never seen anything like them. You wouldn't have. We developed them specifically for threats like this. She turned to face me. The hollow existed partially outside normal space. That's how they consumed matter so completely. Our weapons target those dimensional interfaces, force them back into normal physics where they can be destroyed.
How long did it take you to develop such technology?
212 years. We started the research before we even knew the hollow existed, working on theoretical frameworks for fighting extra-dimensional threats. When the hollow emerged, we adapted what we had. I stared at her. You prepared for an enemy you could not have predicted. We prepared for every enemy we could imagine, and quite a few we couldn't. The universe has been trying to kill us for a very long time, Counselor. We've learned to take it personally.
In the days that followed, I learned more about what humanity had done, what they were still doing. The ship that had saved Varanthi Prime was only the beginning. Across the galaxy, human vessels were emerging from hiding, hunting down the remaining hollow concentrations, protecting civilizations that had offered humanity nothing but dismissal. The Thessari, who had refused the beacon, found human ships defending their borders against hollow incursions they had not known were coming. The Synthesis Collective, whose internal restructuring had prevented them from responding, watched as humanity saved 3 of their core worlds from destruction. The Tribunal of Endless Light, whose prayers had been their only contribution, were forced to acknowledge that sometimes salvation came not from the heavens, but from the species they had considered beneath their notice. I asked Admiral Okonkwo about it when he came to Varanthi Prime for the official ceremony acknowledging humanity's intervention. "Why?" I said. "These civilizations abandoned you. They refused to answer the beacon. They left the galaxy to burn while they protected their own interests. Why would you save them?" He was quiet for a moment, looking out at the stars from the observation deck where we stood. "Because we're not them," he said finally. "Because our history has taught us what it means to face extinction alone. Because we remember what it was like to have no one come when we called. Your species has never called for help. We learned early that help wasn't coming. Every crisis we faced, every extinction we nearly suffered, we survived alone. Not because we were strong enough, but because we had no choice. No other species was going to save us. No galactic power was going to intervene. We were alone, and we survived anyway.
And now you ensure that others are not alone.
We ensure that when someone lights a beacon, someone answers, even if we're the only ones, even if the rest of the galaxy has decided that survival is someone else's problem. He turned to face me. The Hollow were a threat to everyone, Counselor. If we had let them consume the Thessari and the Synthesis and the others, they would have eventually come for us, too.
But even if that weren't true, even if we could have hidden in our little corner of the galaxy and waited for the darkness to pass, we would have answered anyway.
Why? Because that's what survival means. Not just existing, but ensuring that existence continues. Not just saving ourselves, but building a universe worth saving. He smiled slightly. We're not heroes, Counselor. We're just a species that has looked into the void so many times that we've learned there's only one response that matters.
And what response is that?
Defiance. Absolute, unwavering, inexhaustible defiance. The universe wants us dead. It has always wanted us dead. And every day that we continue to exist is an act of rebellion against that fundamental truth.
The ceremony was held in the Chamber of Stars, the same room where I had watched the beacon go unanswered, where I had understood that my civilization was going to die. Now it was filled with representatives from every major power in the galaxy, all of them come to acknowledge the species they had dismissed for 3 centuries.
I gave the speech. I spoke of humanity's intervention, their courage, their capabilities that had been hidden so well that none of us had suspected. I spoke of the debt that the Varanthi, and indeed the entire galaxy, owed to these young, unimpressive, extraordinary people. But the moment I remember most clearly came afterward, when the ceremony had ended and the dignitaries had departed. I found Commander Chen standing alone at the great window, looking out at the stars that her species had helped to save.
Your ship, I said, joining her, Vessel Zero. Does it have an actual name?
She was quiet for a moment. We call it the Prometheus. What does that mean?
It's a name from our mythology. Prometheus was a figure who stole fire from the gods and gave it to humanity. He was punished for it, bound and tortured for eternity, but he never regretted what he had done, because the fire was worth any price.
A fitting name. We thought so. She turned to face me. Counselor Voss, may I ask you something?
Of course.
Before all of this, before the Hollow, before the beacon, before you came to us, what did you think of humanity? I considered lying, but she deserved better than that. I did not think of you at all. Your species was a footnote in our archives, a minor civilization of no strategic importance. When Counselor Thren suggested we contact you, I almost refused.
And now?
I looked at her, at this representative of a species that had saved everything I cared about. I thought about everything I had learned in the past weeks, the hidden fleet, the centuries of preparation, the absolute refusal to accept that any threat was too great to fight.
Now I understand why the galaxy made the mistake of dismissing you, I said. You designed yourselves to be dismissed. You built a civilization that looked unremarkable because you knew that visibility brought danger. You hid your strength and waited, preparing for the moment when you would be needed. And now that moment has passed.
Yes, the galaxy knows what you are now. Every civilization has seen what a single human warship can do. They will never dismiss you again. Commander Chen smiled, and there was something in her expression that made me think she had been waiting for this moment for a very long time.
"That's exactly what we planned," she said. "We couldn't hide forever. Eventually, something would come that required us to reveal ourselves. We chose to wait until that revelation served a purpose, until we could emerge not as conquerors or threats, but as saviors."
You wanted the galaxy to be in your debt.
We wanted the galaxy to understand that we could be trusted. Power without trust is just another form of tyranny. But power demonstrated in the service of others, power used to save those who cannot save themselves, that builds something different. That builds alliances. That builds a future.
I thought about her words for a long time after our conversation ended. I thought about them as I watched the galaxy reorganize itself around the new reality of human power. I thought about them as I saw the other civilizations, one by one, begin to treat humanity not as a minor species to be ignored, but as a force to be respected.
No fleet had answered the call when the Varanthi lit the beacon. The great powers of the galaxy, the civilizations that had existed for millennia and commanded resources beyond imagining, had all found reasons to refuse. They had calculated the costs and benefits and decided that survival was someone else's problem. Only one ship had answered. One ship from a species that everyone had dismissed. One ship that carried within it the accumulated survival instinct of a people who had faced extinction more times than any other civilization in the galaxy. And that one ship had been enough. I am Counselor Merrin Voss, first voice of the Varanthi High Council, and I have learned a truth that I will carry until my dying day. The galaxy measures power in fleets and resources and territory. It counts the ships and weighs the weapons and calculates the industrial capacity of star-spanning empires. But sometimes the mathematics of power are meaningless. Sometimes what matters is not how many ships you have, but what you are willing to do with them. Sometimes a single vessel crewed by a species that refuses to die is worth more than all the fleets of all the empires that have ever existed. No fleet answered the call. Every major power in the galaxy heard the beacon and turned away, unwilling to risk their own security for others.
Only a human warship emerged. And that warship carried something more powerful than weapons or shields or engines. It carried the defiance of a species that had learned, through 10,000 years of nearly dying, that survival was not given, but taken. That the universe owes nothing to the living, but will yield everything to those who refuse to stop fighting.
The Hollow are gone. The galaxy is saved, and humanity has emerged from the shadows at last, revealing themselves as what they have always been, the last answer to every impossible threat, the final hope when all other hope has failed, the one species that will always, always answer the call.
Because that is who they are. That is what survival has made them.
And may whatever gods exist have mercy on anything that forces them to prove it again.